That we have Sayid Bilal Rizvi with us to share his knowledge. Last year we had a great time with you and we learned a lot of things from you, and thank you very much for that. And we would like to welcome him with your loudest of your salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I can raise that up.
If you could extend it, please. Yeah, if you could just loosen it and raise. Perfect, perfect. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرذوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatu Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To give the Imam of our time our condolences upon the martyrdom of his grandfather Imam al-Hussein, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The week which just passed contained the date of the 25th of the month of Muharram, which is the martyrdom of Imam Zainul Abidin. And now we have entered into the month of Safar, which of course are those days where the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet entered into Sham, they entered into the Levant. The subject of analysis tonight, based upon these dates, is to examine the biography of Imam Zainul Abidin after the day of Ashura. Because when you look at the life of Imam Zainul Abidin, and you examine his life in comparison to the other Imams of Ahlul Bayt, you find that one of the longest periods of Imamat belongs to Imam Zainul Abidin. Imam Zainul Abidin is born on the 5th of Sha'ban in the 38th year after Hijrah. If he is born on the 38th year after Hijrah, we know that Amir al-Mu'mineen dies in the 40th year after Hijrah. That means 2 years of the life of Imam Zainul Abidin are spent with his grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib. But further than that, the martyrdom of Imam Zainul Abidin occurs on the 25th of Muharram, either in the 94th year after Hijrah or the 95th year after Hijrah. What this means is that at the age of his martyrdom, Imam Zainul Abidin is either at the age of 56 or the age of 57. And that means that the period of his imamat is either 33 years or 34 years. In other words, after the day of Ashura, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam lives for a period of 33 or 34 years. Now the question that we need to ask ourselves is that what did the Imam accomplish? That if I were to ask you this simple question, that what did Imam Zainul Abidin do after the day of Ashura? Was it simply that he would cry for his father and he had certain du'as, or is it something which is much deeper? And that is why tonight we'll examine the biography of Imam Zainul Abidin after the day of Ashura. But before I come to that part of the analysis, I think it's very important that we recognize that, number one, who the mother of Imam Zainul Abidin is and who the father of Imam Zainul Abidin is. Of course, the father of Imam Zainul Abidin is whom? It's Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. There's a very famous tradition that when Imam Zainul Abidin was young, there was a time that he had become ill. And when the Imam had become ill, Imam al-Hussein goes to his son, Imam Zainul Abidin, and he says, "Oh my son, is there anyone that I can bring to help you?" You know what Imam Zainul Abidin replies? He replies by saying that it is only Allah who can help me. That imagine a child, you're asking him in his time of illness, is there anyone who can help you? He replies by saying that only Allah can help me. Imam al-Hussein says that, "Oh my son, in this regard you are like the Prophet Ibrahim." Because when the Prophet Ibrahim was thrown in the fire by Nimrud, you find that Jibreel, the angel, would come to Ibrahim. And he would say to Ibrahim, "Oh Ibrahim, can I help you? You are within this fire." Ibrahim replied by saying that, "Yes, I am in need of help, but Allah is the one who will help me." So in that regard, we find that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they continued the legacy of the Anbiya. So the father of Imam Zainul Abidin is very well known. But now the question is that who was the mother of Imam Zainul Abidin? Oftentimes in Marthia and Masaib, we hear that her name was Sharbano. But when we go to the narrations, we find without a doubt, yes, Sharbano was one of her names. But another of her names was Shahzanan. And whom was this Shahzanan, the mother of Imam Zainul Abidin? The narrations mention that the last king of the Persian dynasty, the Sassanid dynasty, you find the last king of that time, his name was Yazdegerd III or Yazdejord. And you find that this Shahzanan was the daughter of Yazdejord. That when she comes towards Arabia, Amir al-Mu'mineen marries off her to Imam al-Hussein, and he marries her sister to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. So in this regard, you find that this lady is married to Imam al-Hussein, and she passes away shortly after giving birth to Imam Zainul Abidin. So you find that Imam Zainul Abidin, he didn't have a relationship with his mother. Why? Because she passed away. So this was in regards to the biographical sketch of Imam Zainul Abidin. But now the question which I proposed at the beginning of this majlis is that what was the legacy of the Imam after the day of Ashura? And when it comes to understanding this legacy, it's very important that we go to a famous ayat of the Quran, because this ayat of the Quran manifests very clearly in the life of Imam Zainul Abidin. And that is that verse of Surah As-Sajda, chapter 32, verse 24. Within that verse, Allah, He says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُؤْقِنُونَ. This is the only verse of the Quran where Allah, He mentions that what is the criteria based upon I make someone an imam. There are other verses of the Quran which mention the attributes of the imam. But this is the only ayat where Allah explains why I have made these individuals a'immah. He says that we have made from amongst you imams who guide by the command of Allah. And why have we made them imams? Because they were patient and because they were certain within our signs. Within this ayat, we find three elements. And all of these three elements manifest in the legacy of Imam Zainul Abidin. The first element that this ayat mentions is the element of guidance. The second element it mentions is the element of patience. And the third element that it mentions is the element of certainty. You see, certainty manifests in the worship of Imam Zainul Abidin. The patience of the Imam manifests in his propagation of the event of Karbala, and you find his guidance manifests within his teachings and in his du'as, and I'll explain each of these at a deeper level. From the third level, I said that this verse, it mentions that one of the signs of an imam is that an imam is certain in the signs of God. And I said that certainty manifests in the worship of Imam Zainul Abidin. You see, there is a famous verse of the Quran that says, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, that worship your Lord until you attain certainty. And certain mufassirun, when they understood this ayat, they said it either means until you attain certainty, or it means until you attain death. Because one of the names of death is yaqeen and certainty. Over here, you may ask the question, is that why is death called certainty? The reason that death is called certainty from one angle is that at the moment of death, everyone is certain. The atheist is certain that there is a hereafter. And the believer is certain that he was upon the path of truth. And in that sense, you find that certainty is one of the names of death. But what this ayat is demonstrating is that there is an immense link, O human being, between your worship and between that certainty you have in the existence of God. You know, one day it's stated that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam is standing there. And someone asked Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He asked the Imam that when your father stands up for prayer, only the clothes on the body of your father is moving. That imagine somebody is standing so still. His body is straight. And because of the wind, the only thing which is moving on the body of Imam Zainul Abidin is the clothing of Imam Zainul Abidin. So they say to Imam al-Baqir that how is it that your father is able to worship Allah in such a state? You know what Imam al-Baqir replies? He replies by saying that it is because my father recognizes the one whom he is standing in front of. You know, they said to Amir al-Mu'mineen that, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, do you see your Lord when you worship him? The Imam replied by saying that I see my Lord, that I do not worship a Lord that I can't see. So they said to Amir al-Mu'mineen that what do you mean that you don't worship a Lord that you can't see? The Imam says that it is not with my physical eyes that I see my Lord, but it is through the reality of my belief in God that I am able to see him. In other words, he has shown me so many signs within my life that there is no doubt that I have within his existence. And in that regard, it is always as if my Lord is in front of me. You know, there is a famous saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen where the Imam, he says, Araftu Rabbi bifas'il azayim. That he says, I recognize my Lord through the breaking of my aspirations. What the Imam says in this line is that oftentimes, you and I in our lives, we intend to do something. And we give it our all. We give 100% for that to happen, but it doesn't happen. The Imam says that this occurrence in the life of a human being is a realization that, oh human being, when you try for something and it doesn't occur in your life, then realize the fact that it is somebody else who is calling the shots. It is somebody else whose will manifests within this universe. And in that regard, Amir al-Mu'mineen is showing that a person who worships God, in that regard, is always cognizant of God. And we see this reality in the life of Imam Zainul Abidin. That when you look at the title of the Imam, of course the Imam's name is Ali ibn al-Hussein. What is his title? His famous title is Zainul Abidin, the beautification of the worshippers. You know, oftentimes in Marthia and Soskhani, in the Urdu language, we hear the title Bimar Imam. Without a doubt, in terms of musibah, in terms of crying, it's a powerful title. That without a doubt, Imam al-Hussein, Imam Zainul Abidin was ill on the day of Ashura. But Bimar Imam is not a defining feature of Imam Zainul Abidin. And nowhere within the Hadith do we find this title, the sick Imam. Within the Hadith, we find Sayyidus Sajidin, the best of those who do sajda. Within the Hadith, we find Dhul Tafanat, that this is that Imam, he would worship Allah so much that there would be a callus upon his forehead. And twice a year, he would take some device and he would cut that callus. And because of that, he would be called Dhul Tafanat. But no, one tradition says that he is Zainul Abidin. You know, oftentimes people ask these titles for the Imams, that Baqir, the one who would split knowledge. Sadiq, the one who was truthful. Qadim, the one who would swallow his anger. Are these titles simply titles that we have given out of love to Ahlul Bayt? The reality is no. It is not us who has given them these titles, but in reality, their grandfather Rasulullah gave them these titles. That there is one tradition where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, the Prophet Muhammad says that upon the day of judgment, that when all of the Anbiya are standing there, and all of those individuals who worshipped God are standing there, a call will be made that Yunadi Munadin Aina Zainul Abidin. That a caller will call out that where is Zainul Abidin, the beautification of the worshippers. And within that crowd, Imam Zainul Abidin will stand up and they will say, this is the one who is Zainul Abidin. You know, Imam al-Baqir, he says that one day I saw my father. And as my father was worshiping, I saw that there was sweat on the forehead of my father. And I saw that his feet had become swollen from worshiping so much. At that moment, I had mercy upon him. And I said, oh my father, why do you worship in such a manner? You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, oh my son Baqir, bring me these scrolls within my room. When Imam al-Baqir brings these scrolls in front of Imam Zainul Abidin, the Imam looks at the scrolls and he says, within these scrolls written is the worship of my grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he says, who can worship like my grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen? So you find that when Ahlul Bayt worship Allah at such a level, it is because they had certainty within the signs of Allah. And that certainty manifests in every aspect of the life of Imam Zainul Abidin. So this is the first element of the Imam. Now the second element when it comes to the biography of Imam Zainul Abidin after the day of Ashura is that the ayat it mentions that an Imam is one who is certain in the signs of God, but an Imam is also somebody who is patient. You know, when we look at the life of the Imam, oftentimes on that, from an inward level, many people, they present Imam Zainul Abidin as if Imam Zainul Abidin was a weak-hearted individual. But when one critically examines what Imam Zainul Abidin did after the day of Ashura, you find that he carried out jihad at the highest level. And what I mean by this is that jihad, or to struggle in the way of Allah, is not only to struggle on the battlefield with a sword, but a second type of jihad and struggle is that a person struggles with their character as well in the way of God. You know, one day, a person comes to the door of the Imam, and the Imam gives water to that individual. Later, a group of people, they come to the Imam and they say that, "Oh Imam, do you not know whom you just gave water to?" The Imam says, "I am aware who I gave water to. It is of my character to give water to even such an individual." You know who that individual was? That individual was that person by the name of Hasin ibn Numair, or Hussein with the Saad ibn Numair. Hasin ibn Numair was one of the individuals who was involved in the killing of Ali Akbar alayhi salam. That imagine a person who killed your brother is coming to you to ask for water. But this is that household of generosity. And in this regard, Imam Zainul Abidin didn't pick up a sword on the day of Ashura, but with his character, he struggled in the way of Allah. So you find this is another form of struggle. But a third form of jihad and struggle is to struggle with your tongue in the way of God. That's why there's a very famous expression in the Arabic language that one of the greatest things an individual can do within their life is kalimatul haq in the sultan al-ja'ir. That what this means is to speak the truth in front of an oppressive ruler. And in this regard, Imam Zainul Abidin showed his bravery even a few days after the day of Ashura. You see, when the caravan of Ahlul Bayt is taken to Kufa, and they enter the court of Ibn Ziyad, Ibn Ziyad, when he looks at Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, "Oh man, what is your name?" The Imam says that my name is Ali ibn al-Hussein. You know what Ibn Ziyad replies? He says, "Alaysa Allahu qatala Ali ibn al-Hussein?" Did Allah not kill Ali ibn al-Hussein, referring to Ali Akbar alayhi salam? That look at the wordings of Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad is saying that, did Allah not kill Ali Akbar? You know what the Imam replies? He says, "Bal qatalahu nas." It is not Allah who killed my brother Ali Akbar, but rather it is the people who killed him. Then Ibn Ziyad says, "La bal qatalahu Allah," but rather it was Allah who killed him. And at that moment, he begins to threaten Imam Zainul Abidin. But Imam Zainul Abidin, he replies with bravery. He says, "Abil qatli tuhaddiduni?" That do you threaten me with death? "Innal qatla lana adatun wa karamatana min Allahi ash-shahada." The Imam says that for us to be killed is normal for us Ahlul Bayt. And our honor from Allah is ash-shahada and martyrdom. So in this regard, you find that the Imam, he demonstrates his patience and his bravery. Another example is when Ahlul Bayt, they went to Sham. The state of Sham and the Levant, Syria, Damascus was such that the people, they didn't know that Ahlul Bayt had entered there. One man, he comes to the caravan of Ahlul Bayt. He sees Imam Zainul Abidin and he says that may Allah be praised for conquering you individuals. Imagine the family of your prophet is being brought and a man is saying that may Allah be praised for conquering the family of your prophet. You know what the Imam replies? He says, Ya Shaykh, hal qara'ta al-Quran? That have you read the Quran? The man says, yes, I've read the Quran. He says, have you read the verse of the Quran? قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. The verse which says, O Prophet, say that I ask for nothing except love for my family. The man says, yes, I've read this verse. The Imam says, نَحْنُ الْقُرْبَى, we are that family. After that, the Imam says that have you read the verse of the Quran, وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَ حَقَّهُ, that give the right towards your kinfolks. The Imam says, نَحْنُ الْقُرْبَ, we are that family. Then after that, the Imam, he recites the verse of Khums. وَأَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَ فَأَنَّ خُمُسَهُ لِلَّهِ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى, that give 1/5 to the Allah, the Prophet, and the family. He says, Nahnu al-Qurba, that we are that family. Then the Imam replies to the man and he says, have you read the verse of the Quran? إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلِ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. The man says, yes, I've read this verse that says we have purified the Ahlul Bayt. The Imam says, we are that Ahlul Bayt. So you see in this manner, Imam Zainul Abidin, shortly after the day of Ashura, time and time again, he is making the ummah of the Prophet aware as to who they are. Because there was such a negligence about whom the family of Rasulullah was. And without a doubt, the greatest demonstration of this occurs in the court of Yazid. When the Imam, he enters the court of Yazid, within that courtyard, his sisters and his aunts are as captives. Within that courtyard, the heads of the martyrs are upon spears. Within that courtyard, you find that Yazid, he looks at the head of Imam al-Hussein. And he takes a stick and he begins to poke the teeth of Abu Abdullah. But within that courtyard, you find that after the sermon of Sayyidah Zainab, a caller goes up and he begins to praise Yazid and Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah. Imam Zainul Abidin, when he looks at that caller, that announcer, and he says, oh man, ayyuhal khatib, ishtarayta ridal makhluq bi sakhatil khaliq. You are such an individual that you have purchased the pleasure of the creation at the cost of displeasing Allah. In other words, what type of individual are you that to praise and to please the creation of God, you've angered God? And then after that, he says, O Yazid, adinli hatta asada hadihil a'wad. That, O Yazid, do you give me permission to go upon this pile of wood? The Imam over there, he doesn't call it a mimbar. Because a mimbar, this structure which we call a mimbar, is only considered a mimbar when the truth is spoken on there. It is only considered a mimbar when the fadail and the virtues of Ahlul Bayt are spoken upon there. Because a mimbar is that what Rasulullah would sit on. But now from that same spot, if you are cursing the family of Rasulullah, in reality, it is just a structure of this world. It has no reality beyond that. So in this regard, the Imam, he demonstrates this legacy. The third aspect of the legacy of Imam Zainul Abidin after the day of Ashura is seen in the guidance the Imam gives via his du'as. You see, when you look at the life of Imam Zainul Abidin, the Imam did not have the political circumstances where the Imam could openly go and give sermons like his grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know, Imam Ali alayhi salam gave so many sermons that we have Nahjul Balagha. But how many sermons do we have from Imam Zainul Abidin? The only sermon we have which is famous is that sermon which he gives in the court of Sham and maybe a handful of other sermons. But what the Imam did is that he presented a dilemma for the government of that time. Because the government of that time claimed that they were Muslims. And if you were a Muslim, can you stop a Muslim from making dua? No, you can't stop an individual from making dua. So what Imam Zainul Abidin would do is that he would give an entire lesson in Islamic thought in each of these duas. That if you want to understand the Tawheed of Allah, the first dua of Sahifatul Sajjadiyah is there. If you want to understand the role of the angels, the third dua of a Sahifatul Sajjadiyah is there. If you want to understand that what is hardship and how do I deal with hardship, Imam Zainul Abidin describes it in such a way that it is as if the Lord of Imam Zainul Abidin is close with everyone. Look at the wordings. You know, there's a famous dua number 7 of a Sahifatul Sajjadiyah. And within that dua, Imam Zainul Abidin describes hardship in a manner that each of us can relate to it. The Imam says, Ya man tuhallu bihi uqadul makare. The Imam says, Oh Allah, you are the one who unties the knots of that which I dislike. Isn't it the case when one of your family members passes away, or you have financial hardship, or hardship within your family, it's as if there is a knot within your chest. It's as if everything is constricted for you. The Imam, when he calls Allah, he says, Oh Allah, these knots which are there, you are the one who can untie these knots. وَيَا مَنْ يُفْتَأُ بِهِ حَدُّ الشَّدَائِدِ. And oh Allah, the sharpness of hardships, the sharpness of severity, you are the only one who can blunt those hardships. No, in another dua, Imam Zainul Abidin expresses that the greatest act of worship for an individual is that they submit to the will of Allah. You know, there is one dua that Imam Zainul Abidin would recite this dua when he was sick. And within that dua, the Imam says something which is ajib and truly astonishing. You know what the Imam says in that dua? The Imam says, Oh Allah, paraphrasing within my own words, the Imam says, Oh Allah, I thank you for the health within my body. This makes sense. Everyone, they thank Allah when they are healthy. But then the Imam says, Oh Allah, I thank you for this illness which I have as well. And he says, I do not know which of these two conditions is worthy of thanking you more. Have you ever heard an individual, besides the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, say such a statement? That, oh Allah, I do not know whether health is better for me or whether illness is better for me. You know what Imam Zainul Abidin highlights in these duas? He highlights that the philosophy of dua is for you to accept the will of Allah. You know, if I were to take a survey in this hall, and if I were to ask you what is dua, what would you say that what dua is? Many people will reply by saying dua is when you ask Allah for something and Allah, He gives it to you or He doesn't give it to you. But when you look at the meaning of the word dua, you find that it is something deeper. And when you look at the hadith of Ahlul Bayt, you find that dua is something deeper. Because the word dua comes from the Arabic word da'a. And the word da'a, literally, it means to call upon Allah. That's why Ahlul Bayt have so many traditions that emphasize the importance of dua in your worship. For example, one tradition of the Imam would say, ad-dua huwa al-ibadah. That dua is worship. Another tradition will say, ad-dua mukhul ibadah. You know, mukh in the Arabic language is the most vital part of your brain. And the Imam is saying over here that the core of your worship, the essence of your worship is dua. What this means is that, oh human being, the most basic thing that you can do in your relationship with God is that you can call upon God. And in that sense, there is nothing too small when you are calling upon Allah. There's a very famous tradition that Allah, He speaks to the Prophet Musa. And when He speaks to Musa, when He speaks to Moses, He commands Musa. And He says, O Musa, salni kulla ma tahtaju ilayhi, hatta alafa shatik wa milha ajinek. He says, O Musa, ask me for everything. Even that grass for your sheep, and that salt which goes into that dough which you use to make bread. That even that salt for your bread and that grass for your sheep, don't go to anyone else, ask me, O Musa. And in that regard, Imam Zainul Abidin is demonstrating the reality of dua. You know, when you look at a Sahifatu Sajjadiyah, you know, Nahjul Balagha, we've given a great position to Nahjul Balagha. It is the sermons of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But you know what the difference between Nahjul Balagha and As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is? Nahjul Balagha was compiled by a great alim. It was compiled and put together by Sayyid al-Radi. But As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah was put together by Imam Zainul Abidin himself. That is the difference between Nahjul Balagha and As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah. That these du'as in As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah, Imam Zainul Abidin on one side would tell them to his son Zayd. And Zayd would tell these du'as to his son Yahya. But on the other side, you find Imam Zainul Abidin would give these du'as to Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, and Imam Muhammad al-Baqir would tell these du'as to Imam Jaffar al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So in this regard, you find As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah was passed to two of the children of Imam Zainul Abidin. But now when you look at As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah, you know, one of those great incidents which demonstrates the power of As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah is that there was a very famous scholar at Al-Azhar in Egypt. And the scholar died in about the 60s or 70s. His name was Jawhari At-Tantawi. And if you go and you ask any of the non-Shia who is At-Tantawi, At-Tantawi is a very famous mufassir and commentator of the Quran. It's like asking a Shia person who is Allama Tabatabai, they'll be able to answer. So it stated that Ayatollah Marashi Najafi, he sent a copy of As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah to At-Tantawi. When At-Tantawi, he receives As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah, he says that I have received those du'as from that Imam who is Imam al-Zahidin. The one who is the Imam of asceticism. The one who is Sayyid al-Sajidin. The one who is the best of those who would prostrate. The one who was the grandson of Rasulullah. And then after that, he says something strange. He says, Mina shiqa anna ila al-an lam naqif ala hadha al-athar al-qayyim al-khalid la min mawarit al-nabuwa wa la min turati ahl al-bayt. He says, it is one of our signs of misery that we have not come across such a book from the works of the Prophet nor from the legacy of Ahlul Bayt. فَكُلَّمَا تَعَمَّلْتُهَا وَجَدْتُهَا فَوْقَ كَلَامِ الْبَشَرِ وَتَحْتَ كَلَامِ الْخَالِقِ. That every time I reflect upon these du'as of Zainul Abidin, I find that they are less than the words of Allah, but they are greater than the words of the creation of Allah. So you find in this manner, the du'as of Imam Zainul Abidin were one of his central legacies after the day of Ashura. But the final of the legacies of Imam Zainul Abidin, which in modern times is a bit of a touchy subject because of the context that we grew up in, is the training that Imam Zainul Abidin would give to the slaves of that society. Now, Islam did not abolish slavery. And this statement is very controversial at times because we think of slavery in the context of the American style of slavery, which was race-based, which kept people at a lower economic level. But what Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would do is that they would train those people who were their servants. And after training them, they would free them into society. And these individuals would be people who were important in society. That's why within the Muslim world, there were many dynasties of ex-slaves within the Muslim world. For example, the Mamluks who ruled over Iraq were ex-slaves. The Ottomans, many of them were ex-slaves. So you find that slavery in the Muslim world had a very different context than in American society. So one key aspect that Imam Zainul Abidin would do is that he would train these individuals. You know, one day, one of the servants of Imam Zainul Abidin, she had a water pitcher or water jug. And one narration says the water jug, it hits the Imam begins to bleed by accident. And another narration says that she spills boiling water on Imam Zainul Abidin. You know, the moment that happens, the Imams would train those who are in their homes to recite the Quran. She says, وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, that the servants of Allah are those who swallow their anger. The Imam says that I have swallowed my anger. Then she says, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and they do good towards mankind. The Imam says that I have forgiven you. And then she recited the final portion of the verse, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, Allah loves those who do good. The Imam says you are free in the way of Allah. You see, in this manner, these individuals who were in the household of Ahlul Bayt, many of them were freed individuals, but they stayed in the house of Ahlul Bayt because they found that there is no better place to be than the house of Ahlul Bayt. You know, in this regard, there's a famous story of Qambar, the servant of Imam Ali, that one day Imam Ali is going with a caravan. Qambar is there, a beggar comes, and he says, "Oh Ali, give me some food." The Imam says, "Oh Qambar, go and give bread to this individual." Qambar says that the bread is in a container on top of the horse or the camel. The Imam says, very well, give the entire horse to that individual. Qambar says, "Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, I don't know which camel, which horse it's upon." The Imam says, "Oh Qambar, give all of the animals to the man." You know, at that moment, what does Qambar do? Qambar, at that moment, he jumps away. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Oh Qambar, why did you jump away?" Qambar says, "Oh my master, your generosity was at this time that I was afraid that you would even give me away." Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Oh Qambar, what would be wrong with that?" Qambar says that you can find 1,000 servants like me, but I can't find one master like you, Ali ibn Abi Talib. So in that regard, you find that the legacy of Imam Zainul Abidin after Karbala, from one level, his legacy contained in his ibadah. From a second level, it was to make people aware of Karbala by speaking the truth in the courts of Kufa and Sham. From the third level, it is seen in the du'as. From the fourth level, it is seen in him training the servants of that time. But in the fifth level, It is making people aware of the masayib and the musibah of his father Hussein. That one day a man comes to Medina and he says, Ana al-gharib, that I am alone. Imam Zainul Abidin, he looks at that man and he says, oh man, if you were to die today, would they bury you? Would they put a shroud upon your body? Would they give ghusl towards you? The man says, yes. Imam Zainul Abidin says, then do not say that you are gharib and alone. If there was anyone who was alone, it was my father Hussein. One day, Imam Zainul Abidin, in a separate occasion, he goes past a butcher and he sees that the butcher is slaughtering an animal. Imam Zainul Abidin, he says to the butcher that, did you give water to this animal? The man says that we are Muslims, of course we gave water to the animal. The Imam said, did you give food to the animal? The man says, we are Muslim, we gave food. The Imam says, did you sharpen the sword? He says, yes, I sharpened the sword. Then the Imam says that when they killed my father, neither did they sharpen the sword. For 3 days they didn't give him food. And you find that Qutila Abi Adshana, that when they killed my father, they killed my father thirsty. You see, this musibah, it remained with Imam Zainul Abidin, and time again he would remind of the musibah of his father. You know, when the Imam was within the court of Yazid and the head of his father was in front of Imam Zainul Abidin in Sham, it stated that the Imam, as he was giving his sermon, one of the lines that he says that Ana Dhabi al-Husayn, Ana ibn Dhabi al-Husayn ibn Ali, that I am the son of Hussein, the one who was slaughtered in Karbala. Because others, they were killed, but when somebody's neck is cut, then at that point you don't say that he was killed, but you say that individual is slaughtered. As the Imam is giving his sermon, Yazidi says that call the azan, for that is the only thing that'll stop this individual. The moment the muazzin says Allahu Akbar, the Imam says none is greater than Allah. Then the muazzin says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The Imam says my flesh and my hair and my skin and my blood testify that there is no God but Allah. Then the muaddin says Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The moment the name of the grandfather of Zainul Abidin is taken, Imam Zainul Abidin, he looks to Yazid and he says, oh Yazid, is Muhammad my grandfather or is Muhammad your grandfather? If you say Muhammad is your grandfather, then you have lied. But if you say he is my grandfather, then why have you taken his family as captive? You know, one of the most difficult moments in the life of Imam Zainul Abidin is that day when Imam Zainul Abidin buried the body of his father on the 13th of Muharram. It's stated that when Imam Zainul Abidin, he reaches the land of Karbala, you know, many of you, your family members have passed away. When your family members passed away, you weren't alone at that moment. The community would come around you. They would help you lift that janazah. But I say on the 13th of Muharram, when Imam Zainul Abidin reaches the land of Karbala, you find that body after body is laying upon the plains of Karbala. Imam Zainul Abidin says to the tribe of Banu Asad that make one grave for the companions, they begin to bury the Ashab of Hussein. As they're burying the companions of Abu Abdullah, one member of Banu Asad comes to Imam Zainul Abidin and he says, "Oh man, there is one body by the Furat. When we pick one side of the body, the other side it breaks and it falls to the ground. And then we pick the other side of the body and it falls to the ground." The Imam, he says, "Oh man, that is the body of my uncle Abbas. I will bury that body." Then after that it stated, Imam Zainul Abidin, he places a piece of cloth on the ground. He begins to get the pieces of the body of his father. He begins to bury his father. As he's burying his father, it stated a voice, it comes from the cut body of Imam al-Hussein. That voice, it said, "Tifli, Tifli, where is the infant? Where is the infant?" Imam Zainul Abidin says, "Oh Banu Asad, where is the body of the 6-month Ali Asghar?" Imam Zainul Abidin, he buries his brother Ali Akbar by the feet of his father. He places Ali Asghar on the chest of his father. He closes the grave. He says, "Hada qabru Abi Abdullah alladhi qutila gharib wa adshana." This is the grave of Hussein, the one who was alone, the one who was thirsty on the day of Ashura. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, may you elevate our marhumeen who are not with us anymore. Ya Allah, may you grant them the shafa of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. May you grant us the ziyarah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and allow us to see the reappearance of the 12th of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, Matam Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas. जब तक है दौरे आसमां सुन ले ये हर पीरो जवा आवाज पर शब्बीर की बढ़ता रहे ये कारवां रुकने ना पाए ये कदम ऊंचा रहे अपना आलम ऊंचा रहे अपना हर कल्ब पर चाहते चलो दुनिया को बतलाते चलो एक एक महज़े जुल्म की तस्वीर दिखलाते चलो हर दिल में बर्दोशे का गम ऊंचा रहे अपना आलम कब तक ना मानेगा कोई वो वक्त आएगा कभी हर कल्ब पर छा जाएगा अपना हुसैन इब्ने अली दुनिया रहे ज़ेरे कदम ऊंचा रहे अपना आलम ऊंचा रहे अपना आलम या हुसैन या पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात